The canvas of dust. In the heart of Quaggafontein, where the red dust settles on everything like a thin layer of forgotten time, lived a girl named Enel. While other girls her age were obsessed with the latest fashion or the boys playing soccer in the street, Enel was obsessed with the walls. Specifically, the gray, peeling back wall of the community clinic that everyone ignored. Enel didn't have money for brushes. She didn't have money for oils or canvases. She had something else, the charcoal of the hearth. Every morning, after her mother cooked the maize meal over the small fire, Enel would gather the burnt wood scraps. "Enel, you are going to be late for school. Stop playing with the ashes," her older sister, Lorato, would shout. Lorato was the tough one. She worked 2 jobs, cleaning houses in the suburbs by day and waitressing at a local tavern by night, to keep Enel in school. Lorato's hands were calloused from bleach and scrub brushes, while Enel's were always stained black from charcoal. One afternoon, the heat was so thick you could almost taste the salt in the air. Enel stood before the clinic wall. She wasn't just playing. She was drawing a portrait of their grandmother, who had passed away during the Great Fever. As she worked, a group of girls from her class, led by the beautiful but sharp-tongued Bontel, walked by. "Look at the dust girl," Bontel laughed, pointing at Enel's charcoal-stained skirt. "She thinks she's an artist, but she's just making the township look dirtier than it already is." Enel didn't look back. She kept sketching. She was drawing the way the light hit her grandmother's headscarf. She was drawing the dignity in the old woman's wrinkles. But inside, her heart was a bruised fruit. That evening, Lorato came home later than usual. Her face was pale. She had been fired from the cleaning job because a vase had broken on her watch, a vase that cost more than their shack was worth. "I can't do it anymore, Enel," Lorato whispered, sitting on the edge of the crate they used as a chair. "The school fees, the electricity. I think you have to drop out and help me at the tavern." Enel felt the world go cold. School was her only bridge to a different life. But seeing her sisters shaking hands, she realized her art was a luxury they couldn't afford. "I'll go," Enel said softly. "I'll start tomorrow." That night, a rare, violent thunderstorm hit the township. The rain lashed against the corrugated iron roofs, sounding like 1,000 drums. Enel lay awake, crying silently. She knew the rain would wash away her charcoal drawing on the clinic wall. Her grandmother's face, her only masterpiece, would be turned into black mud on the ground. The next morning, the township woke up to a washed-clean world. Enel walked to the clinic, her heart heavy, ready to say goodbye to her dreams. But when she reached the wall, she stopped. The rain had washed away the charcoal. But because of the way the sun had baked the soot into the porous concrete over the weeks, a faint, silver-gray stain remained. It looked like a ghost. It looked like a miracle. A woman was standing in front of the wall. She wasn't from the township. She wore a camera around her neck and looked like she had been searching for something. "Who did this?" the woman asked, not looking away from the wall. Enel trembled. I was trying to clean it, ma'am. I'm sorry." "Clean it?" The woman turned. Her eyes were wide. "Child, I am a curator for the city gallery. This isn't dirt. This is technique. It looks like the wall itself is dreaming." The woman with the camera introduced herself as Ms. Kumalo. She wasn't just a curator, she was a woman who looked at a pile of scrap metal and saw a throne, or a patch of weeds and saw a garden. She reached into her leather bag and handed Enel a business card that felt heavier and smoother than any paper Enel had ever touched. "I have a pop-up exhibition in the city in 7 days," Ms. Khumalo said, her voice like velvet. "The theme is The Unseen. I was missing a centerpiece. I think your shadow portraits are it. If you can give me 5 more pieces on these clinic walls by Friday, I'll transport the bricks themselves if I have to. And I'll pay for your school fees for the year." Enel's breath hitched. A year of school. No more tavern shifts. No more watching Lorato cry over the electricity bill. "But," Ms. Khumalo added, her face turning serious, "they must be as soulful as this one. Don't draw what you see. Draw what the township feels." As soon as the silver SUV drove away, Enel ran home. She found Lorato sitting in the dark, staring at a notice of disconnection. "Lorato. We have a chance," Enel shouted, waving the card. Lorato took the card, her eyes red-rimmed. She looked at the gold-embossed logo and then at Enel's soot-covered fingernails. She didn't cheer. Instead, she let out a long, tired sigh. "Enel, these people, they come here, they take a photo of our struggle, they call it art, and then they leave. You're going to spend a week dreaming while I'm scrubbing floors for people who don't know my name. We need money today, not, maybe, on Friday. Give me 5 days, sis," Enel pleaded, grabbing Lorato's rough hands. "If I fail, I will work at the tavern for the rest of my life. I promise." Lorato looked into Enel's eyes, eyes that were bright with a fire she hadn't seen in years. 5 days, Lorato whispered. "But the hunger won't wait for the paint to dry." Enel began that evening. She didn't go to the clinic, she went to the busiest corner of the township, the taxi rank. She sat in the dirt and watched Baba Jola, the old man who sold roasted corn. His back was bent like a question mark, but his hands moved with the rhythm of a dancer as he fanned the coals. She began to draw him on the side of a rusted shipping container. She used a thick piece of charred wood she'd fished out of a bray stand. As she worked, a crowd gathered. In the township, privacy is a myth. "Why are you drawing the old man?" a boy asked. "He looks like he's hurting," a girl whispered. "He's not hurting," Enel said, her charcoal scratching against the metal. "He's carrying us. Every cob of corn he sells puts a child through school. He's a giant." By midnight, the portrait was done. It wasn't just a man, it was a figure made of smoke and strength. Even the local thugs, the tsotsis who usually hung around the rank, stood back in a weird kind of silence. They recognized the dignity she had given him. But not everyone was moved. Bontal, the girl who had mocked Enel earlier, watched from the shadows of a nearby shop. To Bontal, the township was a cage she wanted to escape by being the prettiest and the loudest. Seeing Enel, the dust girl, getting all this attention felt like a slap in the face. "She thinks she's better than us," Bontal hissed to her friends. "She's making us look like beggars on those walls. Tomorrow, we show her what real art looks like." The next morning, Enel arrived at the taxi rank to find her drawing of Baba Jola ruined. Someone had thrown buckets of cheap, bright pink house paint over it. The dignity of the old man was buried under a neon smear. Enel dropped her charcoal. Her heart felt like it had been stepped on. The crowd that had admired her the night before now just walked past, shaking their heads. "See?" Lorato said, appearing behind her, her work bag over her shoulder. "The world doesn't want your shadows, Enel. It wants us to stay in the dirt." Enel sat by the ruined wall for 3 hours. She didn't cry. She watched the pink paint drip onto the red dust. Then, she noticed something. Where the pink paint was thin, the black charcoal underneath was actually bleeding through, creating a deep, bruised purple. It looked like a wound. She stood up. She didn't try to scrub the pink off. Instead, she took her charcoal and began to draw around the mess. She drew a pair of hands trying to catch the pink paint, trying to hold back the tide of noise. She turned the sabotage into part of the story. She titled it, The Silence of the Envious. Word began to spread. The girl who fixes ruins was becoming a legend. People started bringing things to her. A woman brought a photograph of her son who had gone to the mines and never came back. "Can you put him on my shack wall?" the woman asked, her voice trembling. "So I can see him when I wake up?" Enel realized this was no longer about Ms. Khumalo or the gallery. She was becoming the township's memory keeper. She spent the third day drawing the lost son on a corrugated iron sheet. She worked until her fingers bled. She didn't eat. She didn't drink. She just drew. That night, Lorato came home and found a loaf of bread and a liter of milk on their doorstep. Attached was a note, asterisk for the girl who sees us. From the people of Section B, asterisk. Lorato looked at the food, then at Enel, who was passed out on the floor, her face smeared with black dust. For the first time, Lorato didn't see a dreamer. She saw a worker. She sat down next to her sister and began to wash Enel's blackened hands with a damp cloth, her own tears mixing with the soot. The fourth day arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. In the township, the air gets heavy before a storm, thick with the smell of coal smoke and the metallic tang of approaching rain. Enel woke up with her fingers cramped into the shape of a claw, her muscles aching from hours of crouching against concrete and corrugated iron. "You're shaking," Lorato said, handing her a mug of black tea. There was no sugar, but the warmth felt like a hug. "Don't go out today, Enel. The wind is picking up. The dust will blind you. I have 2 more walls, Lorato. Ms. Khumalo comes on Friday. If I stop now, Baba Jola and the woman with the lost son, their stories stay in the dirt." Lorato didn't argue. Instead, she took her own worn cardigan and wrapped it around Enel's shoulders. "Then I'm coming with you. I'll hold the plastic sheet over the wall so the wind doesn't blow your charcoal away." They went to the back of the community creche. This was the third wall. Enel wanted to draw the laundry queens, the women who spent their lives bent over silver tubs, scrubbing the stains out of the city's clothes so their children could wear clean school uniforms. As Enel began to sketch the rhythm of the washing, the splash of the water, the steam of the pots, Bontal appeared. She wasn't alone. She had a group of boys with her, the kind who spent their days leaning against walls and looking for trouble. "Still playing in the mud, dust girl?" Bontal mocked. She held a can of spray paint, a bright, ugly gold. "My cousin works for the developer. He says they're tearing this creche down next month anyway. Your art is just a tombstone." Enel stopped. The charcoal snapped in her hand. "Then it's a tombstone for the women who raised you, Bontal. Look at the drawing. Don't you see your own mother's hands there?" Bontal looked. For a split second, her mask slipped. She saw the way Enel had captured the specific curve of a woman's back, the exact way her own mother looked every Sunday evening. But the sting of being lesser was too strong. "It's trash," Bontal hissed. She stepped forward to spray the gold paint directly onto the wall, but Lorato stepped in her way. "Touch that wall," Lorato said, her voice a low growl, "and you'll find out why I'm the best cleaner in the suburbs. I know how to scrub things out, Bontal. Including people who don't know their place." The boys behind Bontal laughed. They weren't interested in a fight with a woman as fierce as Lorato. They slinked away, and eventually, Bontal followed, her face red with a different kind of heat. By the 5th day, the township was buzzing. It was no longer a secret. People were walking the charcoal route. They started at the taxi rank, the provider, moved to the shack, the lost son, and ended at the creche, the mothers. But Enel was missing one. The heart piece. She chose the tallest wall in the township, the side of the old water tower. It was visible from the main road where the luxury SUVs drove by on their way to the city. "What are you drawing?" Lorato asked, shivering as the first drops of rain began to fall. "Us," Enel said. She didn't draw herself as a victim. She drew two sisters. One was a foundation, a mountain of a woman made of stone and grit, Lorato. On her shoulders stood a smaller girl, reaching toward the stars with a piece of burnt wood. It was a portrait of sacrifice and hope. The rain started in earnest. It wasn't a drizzle, it was a deluge. "It's going to wash away." Lorato screamed over the thunder. "Enel, come down. It's too dangerous." Enel was high on a makeshift ladder of crates and old tires. "I just need 10 more minutes. I need to finish the eyes." The water began to streak the charcoal. The beautiful mountain of Lorato's image began to melt. Enel cried out, trying to cover the wall with her bare arms, but she was only one girl against the sky. Then, she saw people moving in the dark. It wasn't just Lorato. It was Baba Jola with a heavy tarpaulin. It was the woman from the shack with her son's old blankets. Even some of the school children came out with umbrellas. They formed a human shield against the wall. They held up their coats, their plastics, their very bodies to keep the rain from hitting the tower. "Draw, Enel!" Baba Jola shouted. "We will hold the sky back." In the flickering light of a nearby street lamp, Enel worked like a demon. She used the wetness of the wall to create deep, ink-like shadows that wouldn't have been possible in the dry heat. The rain became her medium. She used the streaks of water to create the tears of the township, turning a disaster into a masterpiece of texture. Friday morning was silent. The township was draped in a thick mist. When Ms. Kumalo's silver SUV turned the corner, she didn't see a dusty slum. She saw a gallery. She stopped at the taxi rank and saw the provider, glowing in the mist. She stopped at the shack and saw the lost son looking back at her. Finally, she reached the water tower. She got out of her car. She didn't take out her camera. She just stood there in the mud, her expensive shoes ruined, looking up at the two sisters on the wall. Enel and Lorato stood nearby, huddled under a single blanket, their faces gray with exhaustion and soot. "I told you to draw what the township feels," Ms. Kumalo said softly, her voice trembling. "I didn't realize the township felt like this." "It feels like holding on," Enel said. Ms. Kumalo turned to her assistant. "Cancel the pop-up in the city. We aren't moving these pieces. We're bringing the city here. We're building the gallery around these walls." She walked over to Lorato and handed her an envelope. It wasn't just school fees. It was a contract for site management. "Your sister is the vision," Ms. Kumalo said to Lorato. But you are the strength that kept the vision dry. I need both of you. The story didn't end with a check and a handshake. It ended with a change. Bontal eventually came to the tower. She didn't bring paint. She brought a flower and left it at the base. The Dust Girl was gone, replaced by the artist of Ezzelwini. Enel still used charcoal. She said the souls of the ancestors lived in the burnt wood. But now, she had a studio. And Lorato? Lorato no longer scrubbed floors. She managed the Ezzelwini Open-Air Museum, showing tourists from all over the world that beauty isn't something you buy, it's something you find in the shadows of the things people have forgotten. The red dust still settled on everything in the township. But now, when people looked at it, they didn't see dirt. They saw the beginning of a drawing. The transformation of Ezzelwini didn't happen in a vacuum. By the following Monday, the silver SUV had returned, but this time it wasn't alone. It was followed by a convoy of trucks carrying scaffolding, glass panels, and a team of architects in bright neon vests. The township, usually a place of slow-moving shadows and predictable rhythms, was suddenly a construction site of dreams. Ms. Khumalo stood in the center of the dust, a clipboard in her hand. The world is coming, Enel. We have 3 days before the international press arrives. They don't just want to see the walls, they want to see the spirit of the girl who stayed behind when everyone else left. But as the scaffolding went up, a new kind of tension settled over the shack Enel shared with Lorato. Prosperity, Enel realized, had a sharp edge. Lorato was now the site manager, a title that came with a radio and a heavy set of keys. She looked different. She wore a blazer Ms. Khumalo had gifted her, but her eyes were constantly darting toward the perimeter fence. They're coming to see the art, Enel, Lorato whispered one night, the glow of a new electric heater flickering against the walls. But what happens when the cameras turn off? What happens to the woman who brought you the bread? What happens to Baba Jola when the tourists bring their own sandwiches? Enel looked at her sketchpad. She was no longer using burnt wood from the fire, she had professional charcoal sticks now, wrapped in gold foil. I'll make sure they see them, sis. I'll put their faces on every pillar. It's not enough to see them, Lorato said, her voice hard. They need to belong here. This gallery isn't ours anymore. It's becoming a museum of our poverty. While the sisters grappled with the soul of the project, Bontal was facing her own crisis. Her cousin the developer had been sidelined by Ms. Khumalo's legal team. The luxury mall was dead. The community center was being renovated into a workshop instead. Bontal walked through the township, her expensive sneakers clicking on the stones. She felt invisible. In a world that now valued soul and grit, her polished fingernails and curated social media feed felt shallow. She found Enel sitting by the old water tower, trying to sketch a new piece called The Price of the Ticket. You think you've won, don't you? Bontal asked, leaning against a rusted fence. You turned our struggles into a tourist attraction. Now people come here to feel sad for an hour, then they go back to their big houses. Enel didn't look up. I didn't ask for the cameras, Bontal. I just asked for a wall. Well, the wall is famous now, Bontal spat. But the people behind it are still hungry. My mother still has to walk 2 miles for clean water because the museum pipes took all the pressure. Your art is beautiful, Enel. But it's thirsty. Enel looked at her drawing, a depiction of a bird made of smoke. She realized Bontal was right. The infrastructure of the gallery, the lights, the security, the fancy toilets for the visitors, was straining the township's already fragile resources. That afternoon, the water in Section B failed. The community members who had held up blankets in the rain to save Enel's art were now standing in a long, angry line at the single working standpipe. They looked at the scaffolding around the water tower, Enel's masterpiece, with a new kind of resentment. "The girl of the shadows has plenty of water for her paint," a man muttered as Enel walked by. "But my children haven't bathed in 2 days." Enel felt a cold knot in her stomach. She realized that by elevating the township story, she had accidentally stepped on the township's toes. She was becoming a symbol of the new Ezelwini, but the old Ezelwini was suffering. Enel didn't go to the gallery office. She went to the tavern. She found Lorato sitting in the corner, her site manager badge face down on the table. "I quit, Enel," Lorato said before Enel could speak. "I told Ms. Khumalo we need to divert the gallery's budget to the water pipes. She told me the investors want aesthetics, not plumbing. She said the pipes aren't part of the visitor experience." Enel sat down. She took out her charcoal. But she didn't draw on paper. She drew a line directly onto the wooden table. "If the art is the problem," Enel said, "then the art has to be the solution." The next morning, the architects arrived to find Enel standing on the highest level of the scaffolding. She wasn't drawing a portrait. She was drawing a map. Using a vibrant, deep blue charcoal she had specially mixed, she traced the underground veins of the township. She drew where the water should flow. She drew the broken valves. She drew the dry taps. She turned the entire water tower into a giant, technical blueprint of the township's neglect. When Ms. Khumalo arrived, she was horrified. "Enel, what are you doing? This was supposed to be a portrait of hope. You've turned it into a plumbing diagram." "This is hope," Enel shouted down from the tower. "Hope is a working tap. Hope is a child who doesn't have to carry a bucket for 2 miles. If the investors want to see the unseen, let them see the pipes they're standing on." The press arrived an hour later. The cameras didn't see a pretty picture of a girl reaching for stars. They saw a 50-foot-tall indictment of the city's failures. They saw the blue blueprint. The journalists began to ask questions, not about Enel's technique, but about the water pressure in Section B. They interviewed Baba Jola, who told them about the dry taps. They interviewed Bontal's mother. Ms. Khumalo stood in the center of the storm, realizing the narrative had escaped her. She looked at Enel, who was covered in blue dust, looking down like a vengeful anger. By the end of the day, the unseen exhibition had a new sponsor. A local engineering firm, moved by the blue blueprint, offered to fix the township's main line for free if their logo could be placed at the base of the tower. Lorato didn't quit. She became the community liaison, ensuring that for every dollar spent on a spotlight for the art, $1 was spent on a street lamp for the residents. But the biggest change was in the girls themselves. Bontal walked up to the water tower as the sun began to set, casting long, blue shadows over the red earth. She looked at the blueprint. "It's ugly," Bontal said. "Yes," Enel replied. "I love it," Bontal whispered. "It looks like we're finally being heard, not just looked at." The night of the grand opening arrived not with a whimper, but with a roar. The Ezelwini Open Air Museum was no longer a dream, it was a reality of glass, light, and red dust. High-end cars from the city lined the gravel roads, their headlights illuminating the humble shacks like stars fallen to earth. Men in suits and women in silk dresses walked gingerly over the uneven ground, clutching glasses of sparkling juice, their eyes wide as they took in the blue blueprint on the water tower. But behind the glitter, a shadow was moving. Lorato, clutching her radio, found Enel in the small back room of the newly renovated community center. Enel was trying to scrub the blue charcoal from her cuticles, but it had settled into her skin like a tattoo. "Enel, we have a problem," Lorato whispered, her face pale under the fluorescent lights. "Bontal's cousin, the developer, he's not gone. He's outside with a sheriff and a stack of papers. They're claiming the land the water tower sits on was never properly zoned for public art. They have a demolition order for the tower. They want to tear it down tonight, before the ceremony is over." Enel felt a cold wave of nausea. Tonight? In front of all these people? Especially in front of these people, Lorato said. "If he tears it down while the cameras are here, he proves that he owns the dirt, no matter what we paint on it. He wants to show everyone that township dreams have an expiration date." Enel walked out into the cool night air. She saw the yellow crane idling at the edge of the property, its long neck looking like a prehistoric predator. Standing beside it was Mr. Sithole, the developer, looking smug in a designer trench coat. "It's a safety hazard," Mr. Sithole was telling a group of confused reporters. "The structure is unstable. We are simply protecting the community." Enel looked around for Ms. Khumalo, but the curator was busy trying to manage the VIPs near the entrance. Then, Enel saw a flash of bright pink. It was Bontal. Bontal was standing near the crane, her arms crossed. She looked at the machine, then at the water tower where the blue blueprint stood, the map that had finally brought water back to her mother's kitchen. Enel ran to her. "Bontal, you have to help me. Your cousin, he's going to destroy it." Bontal looked at Enel, her eyes flickering with a decade of rivalry and a sudden, sharp clarity. "He thinks he can just erase us because he has a piece of paper." She turned to the group of boys who always followed her. "Boys. You heard the man. He thinks the tower is unstable. Maybe we should show him what unstable really looks like." Before the crane could move, Bontal didn't scream or fight. Instead, she sat down. She sat directly in the path of the crane's massive treads. One by one, her friends joined her. Then, Baba Jola walked over, his back straight, and sat beside them. The woman from the shack, carrying the portrait Enel had made of her son, sat down too. "What are you doing?" Mr. Sithole shouted. "This is a construction zone. Move." "This isn't a construction zone," Lorato said, stepping forward and clicking her radio off. "This is a gallery. And you're trespassing on our story." The guests from the city, the influencers, the politicians, the investors, stopped talking. They turned their cameras away from the art and toward the people sitting in the dirt. The unseen were finally being seen, but not as portraits on a wall. They were a living wall. Ms. Khumalo finally pushed through the crowd. She looked at the demolition order, then at the crowd of township residents protecting the tower. She smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. "Mr. Sithole," she said loudly, making sure the microphones of the nearby news crews caught every word. "I think you've made a mistake. These people aren't just residents. They are the board of directors for this museum. And if you move that crane 1 inch, you will be destroying a multi-million-dollar international landmark on live television. Are you sure your insurance covers that?" Sithole looked at the cameras. He looked at the hundreds of faces, some smeared with charcoal, some with tears, all of them defiant. He knew he had lost. With a curse, he signaled the crane operator to back up. The cheer that went up from the crowd shook the very foundations of Ezulwini. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, the VIPs headed back to their suburbs, their cars leaving trails of dust behind them. But the township didn't go back to sleep. Enel and Lerato stood at the base of the water tower. The blue blueprint was still there, glowing in the early light. "We did it," Enel whispered. "No," Lerato corrected her, pointing to the ground. "They did it." Bontal walked up to them, her pink jacket stained with red dust. She held out a hand to Enel. "No mocking, no sharp tongue. My mother wants to know if you can teach a class," Bontal said. "Not just for the kids. For the women. She says she has stories she wants to draw, but her hands are too shaky to do it alone." Enel took her hand. "I'm not a teacher, Bontal. I'm just a girl with some charcoal." "In this place," Bontal smiled, "that's the same thing." The story ends years later. Ezulwini is no longer known as a blackout zone or a dust bowl. It is known as the City of Shadows. Every wall in the township is covered in art. Not just Enel's, but the art of 100 girls who realized that their lives were worth documenting. There are schools now, and the water flows through the pipes Enel drew on the tower. Lerato is the director of the Ezulwini Arts Council. She still wears her blazer, but she never stopped scrubbing, only now, she scrubs away the lies that the world tells about her people. And Enel? Enel sits in her studio, which used to be an old shipping container. She has the finest brushes in the world now, sent to her from Paris and New York. But on her desk, there is still a small, cracked bowl. Inside the bowl are pieces of burnt wood from her mother's old cooking fire. She picks up a piece of the charcoal, feels the weight of the history in it, and begins to draw. She doesn't draw the stars anymore. She draws the dirt. Because she knows that from the dirt, everything beautiful grows.